my interest in serial killers has always been an attempt to understand my own father. Very manipulative. He was a psychopath, absolutely. But was he born or was he made?
You're listening to Creativity Unconfined. Stay tuned to learn about how the arts unlock the doors for those who are imprisoned.
Hey, this is yet another episode of Creativity Unconfined. My name is, as ever, Dave Gussack, and I remain the director for the Florida State University Institute for the Arts and Art Therapy with the Imprisoned. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Ms. Alicia Seymour, a longtime colleague and friend of mine, author of the book Artful Grieving. Apparently, there is yet another book on its way out, but we're going to hear all about that here today. There's so much to unpack today, so we're just going to jump right into the episode. So, first off, thank you so much for coming all the way down here. I appreciate it. This is so much more fun to have you here in person. We're going to just have you just jump right in.
Okay.
Tell us your story. Tell us our story. Tell us your story.
Okay. There's a lot of that. Should we start with when we met and me telling you were wrong? Because that's always a fun place to start.
Yes, you're the guest. I'm the host. Go ahead and tell me when I was wrong.
Not wrong, but that's how Dave and I met, as I was reading The Frenzied Dance of Art and Violence, which, by the way, everybody go read that book. It's really good. Truly.
Thank you.
Mean it. But you could tell that you were very uncomfortable with the serial killer section, and your interpretation of the artwork was scant at best. So I saw you at conference, and I was like, hey, this one piece by Glenn Edward Rogers, you are totally missing some things.
Well, as a little bit of background for those people driving through Georgia right now, chapters 4 and 5 of the book Frenzied Dance actually focus on the art of multiple murderers.
Yes.
The rest of the book deals with the natural relationship between art and violence, particularly well-known artists who basically, I think, sublimated and redirected their aggressive and violent tendencies into their art. And I made the case in these 2 chapters, which, by the way, were indeed extremely difficult.
You could tell.
Yeah. The case I made for these was that they actually, people who were multiple murderers who started painting and drawing while they were on death row, used their art as a way of maintaining their tendency towards manipulation, wielding art as a weapon. And Glenn Everett Rogers was one of the multiple murderers that I portrayed in that chapter, who started doing a lot of art while he was imprisoned. So give us a little bit of background there and tell us about why that resonated for you.
At the time, it wasn't so much Glenn Edward Rogers. It was the piece itself, and being very fascinated by the representation of Santa Muerte and all of that, and seeing you kind of miss that there could be a lot of symbolic meaning there. It was important. This is something that Dave and I go back and forth on with the symbolism and, formal elements, and, I've come around somewhat to the formal elements, but it was a fun debate. It was a fun discussion.
Yeah, and because it was a debate and there was a tendency for us to disagree, and we started communicating shortly after that conference and having these discussions on Zoom.
Yeah.
And at one point I said, why don't we write this up? Let's write this up as an article, and let's focus not only on the piece about the serial killer, but let's talk about the disagreement. Let's talk about the respectful manner of disagreeing. And we wrote an article called Redemption or Manipulation, the Art of the Serial Killer.
Yep.
And then we later presented that. And so, but it goes deeper than that.
It does. The elephant in the room, as we should say.
It's a rather large elephant. And I think for those of you who know Ms. Seymour, have been following her on Instagram and on TikTok, you're unpacking a lot in your life right now.
I am.
And it does relate to some of those early conversations when I first started interacting with you about your interest and fascination with multiple murderers.
It did.
So
starting to do the article with you, as you know, but nobody else does, we had a lot of conversations. Dave, you were one of those people who I talked about my father. And, I think it's factually correct that he's a serial killer. I think technically I should say allegedly, but he's almost dead, so it doesn't matter. but we had long conversations about that and what my moral obligation was. And when I went to the FBI, you were my friend through that and helped me kind of navigate that part of the journey. But I think that's what made our conversation about the serial killers and the multiple murderers and all that a little more interesting, because I have a different lens, possibly,
Well,
than most.
it's kind of personal for you.
It is kind of personal. How could it not be?
Well,
yeah.
And, and I think what I communicated to you is that book took me 8 years to write.
Yeah.
Because it was fairly complicated. And there was absolutely no reason, by the way, for me to write that book. I was compelled to write it.
It was good.
And the chapters, to tell a little backstory, when I did the book Art on Trial back in 2013, I had at that time, somebody had requested that I do a presentation on the artwork of John Wayne Gacy,
right,
the multiple murderer in Chicago who used to dress like a clown. And so I went and spoke about his art, with his art as the backdrop. And I was also there with Sam Amarante, Judge Amarante, who's actually his defense attorney.
Yes.
And coming back after that trip, I happened to be speaking to my publisher at Columbia University Press, who did Art on Trial. And I was telling her I just came back from doing this lecture on the artwork of John Wayne Gacy. And she said, wait, do serial killers do artwork? I mean, she thought that was extremely unusual. I said, no, a lot of serial killers did a lot of art. And we talked for about 10, 15 minutes about that. She said, you need to do a book about this. And I said, no. I said, I'm not going to, because I think that feeds into our cultural titillation, our excitement about it. There's a virtual rubbernecking about this work. It's ties into this notion of murderabilia, this societal fascination of all that is attached to these notorious killers. Yeah. And so I initially had told her no. But then when I started working on the book, I realized if I'm going to examine the give and take between art and violence, I also have to introduce the people who used art as a weapon.
Yes. I think they can still have some expression with it, that it doesn't always have to be weaponized. But after getting, two pieces from very different murderers, Glenn Edward Rogers and Charles Ng, and looking at the formal elements of those, I see the point in the formal elements. Yeah. I do. So that was a different insight. So I think that, it's somewhere in the middle. And I think there is a fascination, because we as people have this fascination with looking death directly in the face without actually dying. And serial killers, it is death walking. So it's a way to kind of challenge our own mortality and look in the face of that without having to actually die.
So, well, then let me ask you a little bit about this, because we've had these conversations about, by the way, we will be getting into Ms. Seymour's own work and about her work as an art
it's
therapist.
It's all interconnected.
But I think I want to examine this a little bit more. Yeah. And we've had numerous conversations, so to me this is just an extension of that. Absolutely. Just so happens we're doing that in front of this mic that I just hit. You collect the art, or you also, what is it that you see in the art? What is it that you find fascinating enough to go out and look for these art pieces?
I don't know that I would describe it as fascinating necessarily. I think my interest in serial killers has always been an attempt to understand my own father. I think that there is definitely that element to it. And certainly, seeing the art and trying to understand and not being able to. And one of the few pieces of advice my father ever gave me was, if you don't understand, it's a good thing. It means you're not like them. So even though I've been on this entire life quest to understand what made him tick, what makes people like him tick, in the back of my head it always plays, okay, if you don't understand them, it's because you're not like them.
This is a line your dad told you about you not understanding serial killers?
Yeah, no, we had long conversations about how he became what he became. He was intelligent. I mean, there was a lot of insight there.
That's not unusual.
Right. Very manipulative. He was a psychopath, absolutely. But was he born or was he made? So there was a lot of trauma, a lot of things. And, he could pinpoint when his, the sense of guilt or conscience kind of left. somewhere around the time he was like 5 or 6, he just realized that he didn't feel those things.
Really? Did
So
something happen at that time that made him
he was
realize the switch was flipped?
He was severely abused as a kid. I mean, severely. So I don't know why he pinpointed that exact time, because I don't think anything had changed. But, we know theoretically about that time is when your personality is set. So maybe it was just age development that's when he noticed it. But when it came to that kind of stuff, he was very forthcoming with me about feeling nothing outside of doing these things.
Was there anything else that he told you that you remember that stands out for you about his dynamics and what his, just to give us a sense of what he was willing to disclose?
There was this he explained himself and psychopaths in general as just being a different type of human. So it's no different than being in the animal kingdom and you have predators and you have prey. So to men like him and, that whole psychopath, they are the predators. They're very good at what they do. He would say one time, does a lion feel bad for killing a gazelle? No. It's a gazelle. That's what it does. That's what it's supposed to do.
And his victims were the gazelles.
They were gazelles. It was no different than when he would go to Texas to go wild boar hunting and, hands-on killing them. It made no difference whatsoever. Wow. Didn't matter. There was no love, but there was no hate. There just was nothing. It's just, that's my nature and that's what I do.
Well, clearly, I mean, you describe the trauma that he experienced, and his switch gets flipped when he's 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. And
he builds this wall. The psychopathy starts to rear its ugly head. We've written about that. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
But then there's other types of trauma that a lot of people experience trauma. A lot of people experience very difficult childhoods. You experienced, from what I know from our many conversations,
one of the worst.
Rather difficult childhood, and yet you went a different path.
Yeah.
How do you account for that? What is it that allow? I mean, it's almost like there's a switch on a train track where you can go this way, which is where your dad went.
Yeah.
Or you can go this way, and you can actually use that to help others.
I think some of it is just you're born that way. I think, others of it is sheer determination, right? I think everybody gets to, but for the grace of God, there I go. How many times in our lives can we look back and say, if I had just made a different decision, I wouldn't be sitting here right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's truly a matter of one different decision, one whatever, and you're going a completely different way. I think whatever he became, it started with, like a lot of offenders do who were abused.
Yeah.
It just happens and then it escalates, and the next thing you know, you feel nothing about it.
We've explored, we've discussed, you have discussed this on other podcasts, your own past experience. I'm not going to unpack that now. That's not what we're going to do here. I don't think that's right. But I think it's safe to say that, like you said, you've gone through some horrendous, traumatic experiences. So where were those crossroads for you? Because you were raised in Appalachian...
Yeah, rural Tennessee.
Right. And for all intents and purposes, you got out.
I did. I suffered to get out. Yeah. I dropped out of high school, and, at 16 years old, I was married off to a pedophile. And I survived being abused for the next 10 years until I could get away. So it was sheer determination that I wasn't going to go down like that. So, but if I had stayed in Tennessee, who knows what would have happened. I had to get out.
And where did you go from Tennessee?
He was from upstate New York, so we lived up there for a while, and then we lived in Pittsburgh. I was in Pittsburgh for a long time before moving back to Georgia.
I would imagine, and we're going to visit this a little bit later with the current book that you're working on.
Oh, yeah.
So this will all come together at that point. There must have been a lot of self-talk at that time where you're ruminating and reflecting on who you are and wondering, can you break out of that identity? Yeah. And so when did that self-talk, because, I mean, clearly where you are now, it's amazing to see where you are and what you've become and what you are becoming. By the way, I want to point that out. I don't think we've seen anywhere near what your peak is going to be. But there must have been a time where you said, "No, this self-talk has to stop, and I've got to change that script."
I would say the behaviors changed long before the self-talk did. And the self-talk still creeps up, right? I mean, that's a whole other, there's a lot of bias, right? And I've had to hide who I am to get where I am. Because even, when I was in grad school, there would be comments from other students about, poor white trash living in trailer parks or high school dropouts. I know, but you're so smart. So,
But you're so smart.
But you're so smart.
Okay.
So, I think the way that I got here was all of the horrible things that happened to me. Like most people, I had to make meaning out of it, right? It had to be for a reason. And getting to this point, hopefully someday, was that reason. That I could help other people, that I could understand some of those things because I've had that lived experience. So that was the survival, even though I thought I was maybe faking it up until a few years ago where I was like, oh no, okay, like I've actually made it somewhere.
And you're a therapist.
Yes.
And you, as a therapist, you also work with people who have undergone trauma, who've undergone grief, and there's a segue happening here. And we're going to unpack a lot of this as we move into your current work with grief and trauma. And you, as a therapist, have helped many people unpack grief and trauma. Where did you start acknowledging your own experiences so that it would inform your work, that you can then help and work with others? And who helped you do that?
I think I started. It's not a clear-cut journey, right?
Right.
Like grief or anything else, it's kind of, pieces here, pieces there. Years ago, I started unpacking it in the art. That's not like a promo for art therapy, but also.
What's the name of our podcast?
Exactly. So the art became the way for me to process long before I became an art therapist. That's what kind of inspired me to go this route. But I'll be honest, it was very, very difficult, if not impossible, to find a therapist that I felt safe and comfortable with. There have been a few over the years here and there, but a lot of this work has been done on my own, which I do not advise anybody to do, by the way. It's not the best way. But when you're dealing with very complex trauma, and through going public on TikTok, I've talked to several people who have, dealt with a similar situation to mine, and not feeling like, you don't learn this in grad school. So some of it has been my own exploration.
Then what would you ask educators who teach grad school to begin teaching? How do we prepare people for this?
I think we need to do a better job with trauma in general, and disenfranchised grief, and the disenfranchised grief that goes with trauma. But
can you explain what disenfranchised grief is?
So disenfranchised grief is, you have to think about grief as a cultural construct. How we grieve, what we grieve, what's approved, all of that is based on our culture and our norms. Anything that falls outside of that is disenfranchised grief, Kenneth Doka. And we have a real serious problem with our culture in disenfranchised grief. And in, not just our therapy, but in counseling, grief is over here and trauma is over there, and we don't always pull them together, and they have to be pulled together. You cannot separate grief and trauma. I mean, you can separate trauma from the grief. Grief isn't always traumatic, but trauma always includes grief. So I think to prepare, especially in the art therapy world, but counseling too, we need to do a better job of preparing people to do that kind of trauma work and not go into it thinking this is just going to be light and fluffy stuff. Because the thing about trauma survivors and those of us who've experienced, really severe childhood trauma is we are reading people all the time. And if I know a therapist doesn't know what they're really working with or whatever, you've lost me before you've even opened your mouth. And I think that when we're not preparing students well enough to understand from the perspective of the trauma survivor and what they need, they're losing them the second they come in the door. And then me as a trauma survivor, I'm like, I'm out. I give up. I'll do it myself. So I don't think we're prepping well enough for severe trauma.
Okay. And then you were a bachelor's level counselor,
I was.
and you were working with different populations,
Hmm.
and then you created your own art. So
Yeah.
here's the question. Did you begin creating the art and then later recognize that it contained your grief and trauma, or did you start making it as a way to reflect that grief and trauma?
It actually started with dealing with my health issues because I have chronic illnesses, systemic lupus, neuromyelitis optica. I was in a lot of pain. At the time, they thought I was going to die because I was so severely ill. And I was very much type A. I'd never taken art classes, but I really enjoyed getting on the floor and getting my hands in it and just really getting into the paint. And I realized that when I was painting, subconsciously, all of that stuff was coming out and I wasn't in as much pain anymore and I didn't want to die. So that's where my journey with art started. And then it became much more of like, oh, I didn't know I was even feeling that way. Oh, I feel so much better now. And then it became a little more intentional after that, but it was accidental. But art saved my life. I do not think I would be sitting here if I had not had that pain relief and emotional relief from the art at the time.
How would you describe your art making process?
I kind of just go with the flow. Like I talk about with my directives or in my private practice, I do a very non-directive directive. I get what is the thing that I'm feeling, and I just kind of dig in and see what comes up. I really don't go into it with a plan. I don't go into it. Occasionally, I may kind of have an image in my head before I start, but it always changes.
And you prefer collage work?
I like collage a lot because I can't draw to save my life.
Okay.
But I have these very emotional images in my brain, and the only way that I can get it out for somebody else to understand it is through collage.
Yeah.
So.
But I think you've given us a lot of permission as well, is that we don't have to be good artists,
Yes,
great artists.
It's process, not product.
Right.
It's true.
But I think
it
for our
is.
clients, and I think for ourselves as art therapists.
It is.
You know.
But it's like I tell people, I can tell you how I feel or I can show you, right? And somebody can say, I feel bad, but for 10 different people, that's going to be 10 different things.
Right.
I can tell you that I was abused. I can tell you, or I can show you. And I can also choose images of women who were used as objects and probably abused and put them in these empowering situations where they are taking their control back and their power back. So I can explain how I feel and also take control back. And I can't do that in some other ways,
Yeah.
So.
And for somebody who, as you self-described, was a person who kept that part of you at arm's length when you started going through graduate school, your books have become very personal.
Oh, they're extremely
just
personal.
To start with, I'm gonna bring this up.
Yes.
And this is a wonderful book called Artful Grieving: 50 Art Therapy Directives to Creatively Inspire Your Practice with Grief and Bereavement. And I would imagine that a great many of the people who are watching this are familiar with this book already.
I hope so.
I imagine the book is doing very well, and there's a lot of people out there. It's a very personal book, though.
Yeah. This started with the death of one of my abusers. I didn't necessarily see him that way at the time, and it was very jarring, and I went through, I don't know, the ultimate disenfranchised grief because, I've talked about it other places. He was my Sunday school teacher. I was 13. He went to prison. We had this back and forth thing for years. I found out he died from COVID on Facebook, of all places. And it was a lot. And when I dove into the literature to try and understand my grief, there wasn't much. So this book kind of started as...
There wasn't much in the literature.
No, there was not much in the literature.
About art and grief.
No, I mean, nobody talks about... Well, there was some about art therapy and grief, but the disenfranchised.
Okay.
The conflicting emotions of, okay, on one level, I know that he's an abuser, but on the other level, I loved him for 20 plus years. And yes, there were times that, it was an affair and all of these other things. And who do you talk to? And, society, the norm is, well, you're supposed to hate them and not have feelings for them. So this was how I processed it. And, was working with a lot of other people who've experienced those kind of losses and really digging into that literature and all of the art in this one and in the next one is my honest and
We'll get
genuine
to the
process.
next one because that one I think is
next one.
sequential, and I think it
It
makes
is.
sense for us to explore that. But I want to stick around a little bit longer with this
Sure.
one. Every art piece here, you did yourself.
I did, yes, everyone.
Yeah, tell me more about that decision to use your own art to illustrate these 50 directives.
I think that it makes sense because I was going through the process, as a therapist, as a client. I don't like using my clients' art. I feel like there is a power dynamic there, especially when I'm working with trauma. They've had a lot of disempowerment that even if I asked and at first they were like, yeah, I'll do it. I don't know how comfortable they would feel about it. So I choose to use my own art and go on the journey, which makes it a lot harder to do the book.
Yeah.
Because these, I'm not just slapping some art out there. Like, this is my actual processing happening.
Yeah.
So I said emotional bloodletting. They're exhausting.
And around that time is when, and a little admission here, I did help Ms. Seymour through a little bit of this process and through the book. And
Dave edited my book, and he's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Both of them.
Yes, and actually, it was for selfish reasons, let's face it. I learned a great deal about things I didn't know about. This whole notion of disenfranchised grief, of complex grief, those are things that affect those inside.
Absolutely. Always. Not just for, the ones inside, the people who are inside, but their families, the people who love them, their children, right? I mean, there are layers upon layers upon layers of grief. And we're not just talking about death losses, because grief can include non-death losses, right? It's the loss of time with your family. It's the loss of who you were before. It's the loss of who you could have been. There's so many layers of grief.
I think that's very important to underscore. We're not talking about just loss through death.
Oh, not even close.
Although the book started that way.
It did. It expanded out dramatically. So it started with a death and then, some health-related losses, which even myself, I didn't recognize as grief at first either.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So really, it focuses a lot on the disenfranchised griefs, which include all of those non-death losses, which are far more common, in incarceration and judicial systems.
Yeah, and we're not just dealing with, the whole notion of people who are inside who have lost their loved ones.
Yeah.
They don't have a right to grieve because they deserve what they got, quote unquote.
Yes.
Right?
Anytime you can assign blame and shame, whether it's to someone who's grieving, if it's a survivor of trauma, that's when we say, I don't care anymore. So as soon as I can find one little thread that I can blame you or shame you or say, well, it's your fault, then I don't have to care anymore. It's an unspoken cultural norm that we have.
That happens a lot in our
society. All the time. We make survivors of trauma prove excessively that the thing happened that they said did. Right? Anything and everything, right? If I can blame you and it's your fault, then I don't have to care about your feelings anymore.
It's like, yeah, I did this, but you were dressed that way.
Right.
Or I did this and you said this way.
Or did you do this to encourage that? Right.
Instead of acknowledging that should not have happened.
It doesn't matter.
Full stop.
Right. And just because somebody has made, in some of my presentations, I talk about layers, right? There's so many different layers that change the dynamic. Just because someone is incarcerated, there's so many reasons why that could have happened, right? They don't necessarily deserve the blame and the shame. Not everybody is just evil like my father and okay. I'm
going to visit that. Put a pin in that. I want to visit that a little bit later.
Should have been locked away. Like, I give the example of, a woman is incarcerated for 3 years for theft. Okay, you feel one way. But then what if you find out that she has 3 kids and she was stealing food to feed her children? Right?
The old philosophical, ethical issue.
Right. This is why we can't just blanket judge people across the board because we don't know. Mm-hmm. But for the grace of God, there you go.
But we're very good about separating us versus them.
Of course we are. We do that with everything.
We find ourselves doing that now with victim shaming and with attacking others.
Because doing an us versus them, I don't have to challenge anything about myself or my beliefs. So that takes work. Being able to look at yourself and question what you believe or how you think or how you act, that takes work. It is easier to be a coward and just say, yep, nope, on you. I don't have to do anything. And we do it all the time. All the time.
So as you start to apply this in your own practice, tell me about you have a private practice. You've had one for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And what's the name of the practice?
Seymour Art Therapy, but like Seemore.
I see what you did there. Seymour Art Therapy. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you find that you attract a lot of people in your practice who are experiencing this type of trauma?
I do. I have quite a few trauma survivors. I am in rural Georgia, and I specialize particularly in the queer and trans communities who are dealing with a lot of, sometimes family isolation, identity stuff. So I am the safe space for that. Deal with chronic health conditions, cancer, the whole gamut of everything. So, but particularly around trauma, grief, and identity.
Okay, so it's that last word, identity, which I think is the transition into the last, not the last, but the project that you're currently working on, or actually finishing, I might add, because I think we just put the last touches on your edits today.
It's been a brutal year.
Tell me about,
It's been a brutal year.
That's on the heels of your own identity recreation. Your whole sense of self has been kind of turned upside down. And what's more is you've been putting it out there.
Yeah, I have.
Tell me about that decision before we get into that book. That decision. Yeah, see what we did? I meant to go left. I went right instead. Tell us about that decision.
To be public?
To be public with this identity re-transformation.
I think that too often we keep things secret and we don't want to share. And there are lots of people out there who have contacted me or, are watching, and seeing somebody else go through it and talk about it, makes them feel not so alone is the comment I get, or inspires them to go seek their own help or to do their own identity work. And, I had to live in secret and carry things for so many years. I just refuse to do it anymore. But so if people can watch or not, it makes no difference to me.
And that's a huge risk to put it out there.
It's huge.
You're saying that now in hindsight, that these are the responses. What was the risk that you were taking, knowing that you were putting this stuff out there that can very well, we know how social media culture is.
I decided that I always do the risk or the regret thing. So when I'm trying to make a decision, which will I regret more, right? And if the worst had happened, going back to end of last year with going public about, abuse that I suffered, if I lost everything at that moment, would I be okay? Yeah. If all of that or all of this had gone south and I woke up tomorrow and everybody hated my guts and I could never be an art therapist again, okay. Yeah. Then I did what I needed to do, and that's okay too. So when you stop worrying about what the worst possible thing is and when you're ready to lose it all, nobody or anything can have any power over you anymore, because I don't care. Take it. It's okay.
And it's been neither black nor white, the response, right? I mean, you've been getting, did you expect to get this kind of outpouring of support? You've basically created a whole new paradigm shift in our own field and in your own social media presence.
I didn't know what to expect. I was coming at it from, I just need to say these things and whatever happens, happens. I went in with no expectations whatsoever. I'm glad that for the most part, everybody has been very supportive. Of course, there are going to be some that, trolls or whatever, and I delete that and move on with my life and whatever. But I appreciate the support. But if the support had not been there, it wouldn't have changed anything about what I did.
Wouldn't change anything?
No.
Okay.
I was ready to do what I needed to do, especially, with this whole situation with my father and trying to track down victims and all of that. Support or not, I was doing it. So having the support is great, and I appreciate it. But
to put all that in context, during this past year, since it was. I have to say, this is a little amusing. You finished with Artful Grieving. You gave birth to this book.
I did.
The book, by the way, is doing extremely well. I've been. It's been fun for me to watch it take off the way it has. And then it was shortly after that you said, "I'm ready to do another book." That wasn't a good day for me. Because okay, I'm going to put that in perspective. I was
Please do.
okay, because I remember I was giving a lot of I was supervising you during your hours.
You were.
I was providing some mentorship in the writing process.
Yes.
I remember what you were going through in this process of developing the book, finishing the book, and I knew that the second book that you were proposing was infinitely more complicated than the first book.
Yeah.
Which this book you started while you were in graduate school. You had support from your faculty. Dr. Carolyn Brown-Treaton.
Love you, Carolyn.
Was a huge proponent of the work you were doing, and you were presenting this at conferences. You were getting a read on how people were responding to it.
Yes.
You knew what you were doing with that.
Yeah.
And of course, you had reached out, and I kind of came on at the tail end. But then you're starting to, you started to explore this notion of what comes next.
Right.
Just because we start to reconcile grief and trauma, and we're dealing with that in the prison system, so we'll make this work. But then you started saying, I need to start examining identity.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, and tell me about how that evolved into what this product is.
That is a long, complicated story, but
We've got plenty of time.
It really started with, as I had gotten to a place personally of feeling like I had reached maybe as healed as I was going to, and that there were some parts of me that were just broken and were always going to be broken, and it was kind of going to be a disability for me forever that I was going to have to deal with. I had several clients coming in and voicing the same thing. I was asked to do, a doctoral research project on identity, and that kind of got me thinking about it. And it just went into a year-long, looking at identity and doing the work on myself and doing the work in my practice. And it was not a straight path. And this has been the most brutal year of my life writing this book. Brutal.
I mean, you almost gloss over it when you say I was looking at identity, and there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there. It's very complicated. But the thing is I try and make it so that it doesn't feel so complicated.
Right.
So I hope that is what I've done, because, when I was starting, it felt so overwhelming. And, where do you start, right? And it's so unique to the individual.
You didn't really start from the beginning on this project.
No, not even close.
You started pretty much in the middle and worked your way out, if I recall.
Yep, buried myself.
We had conversations where I was like, I don't quite know where you're going with this yet,
but
I'm going to trust your journey on this.
And this was a very private journey, too, because nobody had read that until you did a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
and
I didn't even know what was going to be.
You're the only person who's read any part of that book.
Yeah, I was privileged and honored, and also quite scared.
Same.
I enjoy editing, you know that. I hate writing, but I enjoy editing. And so I was more than happy to do this, but I recognized that all of the stuff that you were writing about identity reintegration, and all the dark places you went to in this process, in this book, I wasn't privy to before that.
No.
And so for me to see it with fresh eyes, to realize the path that you went through to create this book, this very personal book, is going to hit a lot of people between the eyes when they read it.
You think so?
I do.
Okay.
I mean,
I can see that.
Explain a little bit more about this identity reintegration, because I think you walk them through these, again, 50 art therapy directives, which arguably can seem contrived, and yet when I read through them, there was a clear trajectory along these 50 directives, till when I got to the last directive, I was like, okay, there's closure here.
Right. It is so...
First of all, why don't you tell everybody what the working title is? This might change. I'm urging her to change the title, but there's a working title.
There's some, disagreement on title. At the moment, it's Recreating Identity After Loss. We floated Artful Identity. The publisher doesn't love it. Hey, guys. So we'll see where that goes. But it really is about putting all of those pieces back together, especially in trauma and grief. It's disempowering, right? You have no control over the things that were lost, and they impact you, especially for people who've experienced trauma, way back as children. Childhood trauma shapes who you become later.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that identity and helping people put those pieces back together re-empowers them, and they see that they get to choose. That just because these things were done to you and that's who you were, doesn't mean that that's who you have to be anymore. And as a trauma survivor, right, and working with the trauma population that I do, I always believe that we were just stuck with these things, right? That there was nothing that could be done. But after going through this journey, especially with the work of Judith Herman, no, you really can change them, right? The things, I think in the opening of the book, I say, the screams become whispers. So there's still pieces of them that are there, and they are you. It's not this all-consuming thing anymore, and it is very empowering. Could I have spoken publicly the way that I am now 5 years ago before I did this work? No, absolutely not. I would have been far too terrified. No, never would have done it. So it's been worth it, but I tell all of my clients who are ready for that stage that it will be the most brutal, probably, process you've ever gone through. Because the difference with processing identity versus grief or trauma is our brains, even though we can feel it, our brains still like to go, that was over there, right? It's over there. The trauma is there. I can kind of separate it from my core. Mm-hmm. Identity reintegration is all your core. It's soul work. It's not this one singular or multiple event. It is who you are. And that is way freaking harder than the trauma and the grief processing.
Well, then the obvious question is, and I think it's a softball question, but I think it's necessary for this podcast, why art then?
Because art, you don't need the words for it. I truly believe that art is the modality of the soul. I really do. I think there are unconscious things that come out through my art that I don't even see until years later. I see it with my clients all the time. Also, if you're going with parts work and we're working with younger parts, that tends to regress into the art. Art has a way of communicating that words will never, ever, ever come close to. Ever.
Yes.
A true believer. I really am. I've lived it. I've seen it.
Well, but there's an interesting transition here, because there were times, and I want to call you on this too, that there was a time, I remember when we first connected in San Diego at the conference, you were ready to kind of chuck it all. And that's no play at all on your husband's name. But you were ready to chuck it all and kind of walk away from the art.
There have been several times.
Ready to walk away from the art therapy field. And yet,
as recently as a couple months ago, I've been ready to chuck it again. I think part of it comes from, I don't know, a frustration, feeling like, I don't know, I guess frustration, feeling like I will never truly fit anywhere, and maybe I don't want to just be in this one box of art therapy.
Do you think there's just one box of art therapy?
No, I don't think there is, but...
Do you remember what I said to you in San Diego?
That's my pack of weirdos.
This is your pack of weirdos.
Yeah.
Do you still believe that?
I do, for the most part. Yeah.
There's yet another question I want to ask you here. And I think this is a fascinating question, and we've kind of talked around it. Mm-hmm. All of us who have tried to make something of ourselves in this field, and we all very much love this field, and we've spent many years to get to where we are. Mm-hmm. And you've managed to accomplish a great deal in a very short period of time, and you're still climbing that ladder. Tell me about that drive. What is the compulsion to make so much of yourself in such a short period of time?
I think that when you're chronically ill and you almost die as many times as I have, you don't have forever. And I just appreciate that I don't have forever. And, with the NMO, I have lesions in, my brainstem, and I could go to sleep and never wake up tomorrow. So I don't have time to waste. I don't take my time for granted. I don't take my life for granted. And I want to live it in put this thing out to help other people while I can. Do I think I'm going to die young? Probably not. I mean, I'm 41. That's not really young anymore. So,
Yes, it is.
but I think that's what drives me is I don't know. And we should all live that way. None of us know.
Yeah.
I'm just more acutely aware of it.
And yet I appreciate how open you are about all of this. We have the honor of presenting yet again. I will say it was so much fun.
Yes.
I think where was that? Pittsburgh?
Yeah,
Where we
Pittsburgh.
presented together. That's when we presented about serial killers.
Yes.
And that was a very popular presentation. That I think that says a lot more about our field than it does about us. But it was very popular.
I think it was me.
I think that's what it was. You were the draw. We're presenting again this year with two of our colleagues.
Yep.
One of them was the doctoral student that kind of
Elizabeth Graham Anderson. Love you, Elizabeth.
who brought you into her project to
Yes.
start exploring identity. And another is Laurie Gentry, who
Who's
I've been
brilliant.
working with. And we've been exploring identity as well in
Yeah.
her own realm. And so that's going to be at this conference. The book is being finished.
Yes.
The presentation will be happening. What's next for Alicia
I
Seymour?
am taking a small break. No, but truly, what's next is diving headlong into finding my father's victims. That is the next thing. Truly, I am, taking a break from the writing, and I am focusing on justice, and that we'll see where that takes me. But that's what I want. That's what I need.
Alicia, this was raw.
Yeah.
And I appreciate this.
This is an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of layers of, I'm okay being raw. This stuff sucks.
Yeah.
Anybody who's been following along for all of this year knows this sucks. And I'm doing okay though. I need everybody to hear that because I have had a lot of people reach out and ask me if I'm okay.
Yeah.
I am okay. I really am. I'm doing what I need to do to take care of myself. I have amazing support systems. I am okay. And it is okay to not be okay too. And there are times where I'm not, and that's okay.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on to this platform to be this open, to explore all of this. I think indirectly, all of this certainly pertains to our work.
Absolutely.
I think it helps us redefine and open up this notion of what the imprisoned means.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a forensic system. It can be ourselves imprisoning ourselves. And I think you've captured that perfectly.
Yeah.
As an art therapist, you're showing our clients, ourselves, that we are human, that we go through this, and we build our lives and build our practice off our own experiences to help others around us. I think that is a shining example of what that can look like. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here, and this just means the world to me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.